Alors, on va essayer de comprendre comment un chercheur, comment un prévisionniste se rencontre à un moment donné pour donner une vie justement à ces projets de recherche. Vazken, si je ne me trompe pas, vous êtes en train de créer un système de prévision des temps, un système de prévision en temps réel des crues à l'échelle nationale. L'idée, c'est de pouvoir cartographier précisément les zones d'inondation. Évidemment, l'idée, c'est d'être aussi le plus réactif possible lorsque la crue se produit. La valeur ajoutée, elle se trouve où dans ce que vous êtes en train de mettre au point?
La valeur ajoutée, c'est... moi, je sais faire pas mal de choses. Oui. Je sais prévoir des crues, je sais analyser les relations entre la pluie et le débit, le climat. Ce que je ne savais pas faire, c'était prévoir l'étendue de l'inondation. Et l'étendue de l'inondation, ça a bien sûr un intérêt pour un assureur comme AXA, ça je sais bien que ça a un grand intérêt. Et pour nous qui donnons des systèmes opérationnels au service de l'État, un service de l'État par exemple, ça a un intérêt puisque le niveau d'une rivière, ce n'est pas très informatif pour la sécurité civile. Et par contre, l'étendue d'une zone qui va être inondée, c'est beaucoup plus informatif. Et c'est ce qui permet au service de la protection civile d'être vraiment utile, d'être vraiment efficace. Et ça, bien sûr, il faut le faire avec autant d'avance qu'on le peut. Et puis surtout, il ne faut pas se tromper sans arrêt, parce qu'on connaît l'histoire de la petite fille qui appelait au loup. Si on se trompe trop, si on a trop de fausses alertes, eh bien, plus personne ne croira dans nos systèmes.
Et justement, pour éviter de crier au loup, justement, et qu'on puisse avoir conscience en ces systèmes, l'idée, c'était d'avoir des cas très pratiques pour pouvoir tester à vraiment échelle ou en grandeur nature, c'est le cas de le dire, vos premiers travaux. C'est là où vous intervenez, j'imagine, Lionel, avec l'Adréal?
Oui, en effet. L'idée est de pouvoir participer à la conception même des outils et de les tester en conditions opérationnelles. Il y a quelques années, Vazken avait commis un article scientifique qui s'intitulait, alors je ne me souviens plus du titre exact, Vazken, mais en gros...
S'en souvient-il lui-même?
En gros, l'idée était de faire des crash tests des modèles. Et l'important pour nous, c'est effectivement de faire les crash tests en amont et en collaboration avec les équipes académiques, de manière à ce que le jour où on se saisit et on passe en opérationnel ces outils, on ait quelque chose de solide sur lequel on puisse s'appuyer, notamment en gestion de crise, où on a vraiment besoin d'être efficace au moment crucial.
On n'a pas envie de faire le crash test quand on a le préfet sur le dos. Il vaut mieux le faire avant.
En effet, c'est quand même beaucoup plus simple de cette façon-là, de pouvoir bien se préparer en amont à la gestion de la crise ensuite. Concrètement, comment vos travaux vont se compléter? Le day-to-day job entre vous, alors j'imagine que ce n'est pas non plus au jour le jour jusqu'à ce point-là de précision, mais comment est-ce que vous collaborez ensemble? Comment est-ce que ça se passe quand on veut échanger justement sur un niveau de précision à apporter, sur ce modèle de géolocalisation des crues, d'étendue aussi? Qui donne des informations à qui?
Moi, je suis un chercheur, je suis dans une tour d'ivoire. Je travaille à mon rythme. Non, je plaisante. Mais en fait, celui qui teste les systèmes opérationnels, c'est lui, c'est Lionel.
Alors, pour répondre à votre question, effectivement, on a des temps de travail qui sont différents. Vazken peut avoir des temps longs, c'est des temps de maturation, de conceptualisation des choses. À l'inverse, le prévisionniste de crue, lui, si on regarde vraiment en focal, il travaille à 6 heures, à 12 heures, 24 heures, ou quelques jours, mais guère au-delà. Donc l'idée, c'est d'avoir une sorte de dialogue incessant qui permettent de confronter les idées et de vérifier que les modèles sont adaptés aux données dont on dispose, par exemple en temps réel, parce qu'en temps réel, on n'a pas toutes les données qui sont bien rangées sur les étagères qui ont été rassemblées a posteriori. Et c'est également de vérifier que nos prévisionnistes sont capables, pourront utiliser ces modèles, ces outils. Et donc c'est vraiment un travail d'élagage, de confrontation d'idées et de retour. Et notamment, alors un retour qui est parfois peut être un peu difficile à vivre, c'est le retour d'expérience après des grandes crues. On en a eu il n'y a pas si longtemps, en 2016, notamment ici à Paris, et puis en janvier. Et là, eh bien, on prend le temps de faire un retour d'expérience complet avec les équipes de recherche pour améliorer les outils qui sont déjà en opérationnel, pour être meilleur à chaque fois.
Donc, il y a en effet un retour très immédiat sur améliorer ce qui existe déjà avec le système mis au point par Vazken. J'imagine qu'il y a aussi une idée un peu reach for the stars à un moment donné. À quoi est-ce qu'on peut penser dans le futur de votre collaboration? À terme, Concrètement, ce système de prévision des crues, il peut nous amener vers où?
Alors, je vais essayer de répondre. Le futur n'est jamais sûr, surtout pour un prévisionniste. L'idée, je pense, c'est qu'on est vraiment à l'orée d'un changement de gestion de crise majeur. Jusqu'ici, on donnait des informations à une station, c'est-à-dire en un point donné, et les gens devaient faire le lien entre la hauteur qu'on annonçait, alors ici à Paris au pont d'Austerlitz, et puis savoir si très concrètement leurs enjeux, leur habitation, leur entreprise est touchée. Dans le futur, si on arrive à massifier, si les méthodes qui sont en cours d'élaboration s'avèrent fructueuses, on pourra fournir des cartes et donc la gestion de crise va changer du tout au tout. Et au-delà de la gestion de crise, donc du temps réel, on peut espérer qu'on pourra s'en saisir pour les actions de prévention pour rendre nos sociétés plus résilientes et être capables de rebondir plus rapidement derrière les crues.
Vazken, concrètement, pour conclure, qu'est-ce qui vous manque, ou qu'est-ce qui vous manquerait, si je peux le mettre plutôt dans un autre temps, pour vraiment réussir à passer à un modèle effectif de modélisation aujourd'hui?
Moi, ce qui me manque, c'est juste le temps. Je pense qu'il y a...
C'est de l'humour de prévisionniste encore.
Non, mais je pense qu'un scientifique, il a surtout besoin de temps. Et en fait, moi, ce que, très concrètement, j'ai beaucoup apprécié dans ce partenariat avec AXA, c'est que je n'avais pas besoin de passer des journées à préparer des dossiers pour l'ANR. Enfin, je pense que tous les chercheurs français savent de quoi je parle. Donc j'avais eu un contact et j'avais discuté avec des gens qui travaillaient dans le domaine de l'inondation à AXA. Et comme ça, on avait construit un projet. Et en fait, j'ai gagné énormément de temps. Et j'ai pu faire quelque chose. Si j'avais pas eu en fait cette possibilité, en fait, je l'aurais pas fait parce que ça aurait demandé trop d'efforts pour aller convaincre trop de monde. Je serais resté dans mon petit domaine. J'ai un petit domaine d'excellence dans la prévision des crues, sans parler des inondations, où je pouvais continuer à ronronner de façon bien agréable jusqu'à la prochaine crue. Voilà.
Merci infiniment à tous les deux. Je vous propose de regagner la salle. Merci. And we're going to switch to English for our next podcast. We'll tackle health this time with not two but three amazing guests. Abdul, Barakat, the chair for cardiovascular cellular engineering at École Polytechnique. Fraz, Bossak, the founder and co-founder though of Sensum. You'll learn about it in a few seconds. And Dr. Sacha Mussot, thoracic surgeon at Marie-Laine Hospital. Gentlemen, great to have you on stage. Let me just switch to this side so that it will be way easier for you to warm your way. So actually, my question is, how come a cardiovascular cellular engineer, a startupper, and a surgeon are bringing life to a major breakthrough, which is actually a smart sensor? How the three of you work together?
It's actually pretty simple. Everything started in 2009 when I met Abdul, who basically changed my life because I was finishing my studies in aerospace engineering, so heading for the sky. And he convinced me that looking to the body would be actually more useful and completely changed everything. He brought me to École Polytechnique where he was launching his AXA chair. I did my PhD with him there and then founded together with him in 2014 the company that is now called Sensum. And what this company is doing today is helping the millions of stroke patients every year by having built a smart guide wire, which is basically a probe that you bring up into the brain, and where there's a little tiny, and you can confirm that it's tiny.
Let me help you.
Yeah, thank you. A little tiny sensor sitting right here that informs the physician so that he can actually facilitate the treatment of that stroke patient.
Amazing. Wow. Abdul, already got a mic.
Thank you very much. So you asked how Sensum and the research group interact, and I'll say a few words about that, and then I'll let Sacha elaborate on how the clinical aspect of this gets involved. So really, Sensum and the research group interact in many different ways. One way concretely is we're co-developing the sensor technology that goes on this little tiny guide wire. A second way we interact is through people exchange. So a number of people who did their PhDs, their postdocs in my group currently work for Sensome. A number of people who started as interns with Sensome now joined the research group. A third way we interact is we have weekly research group meetings, and so far Sensome is based at École Polytechnique, and that's going to change soon because they've gotten too big. But for now, they're at École Polytechnique, and we've made sure that they are involved in the research group, and they come and tell us about their progress, and we make sure that exchange always happens. And then the last, and I think very important aspect of exchange is we were able to identify certain research areas that can benefit from the sensor technology. And I'll give you one very specific example. A couple of years ago, we developed an artificial artery system that we were using for various vascular studies. In thinking about the sensors that Sensome was developing, we found that incorporating these sensors into the artificial artery allows us to do a lot more from a research standpoint. So Franz and I wrote a research grant together, got funded, and now we're developing a smart version of the artificial artery. So I think this exchange of a startup that's developing really interesting technology with research can benefit both quite extensively. I'll let Sacha comment.
Thanks, Abdul. And I'm lucky to work in Marie-Longue Hospital. It's a very special facility near Paris, where we've got a big experience in thoracic and vascular surgery. And we work we've got a research lab, and this research lab has got connection with you, Polytechnique, all that stuff, because stroke is definitely a very important medical issue. And with a number of progresses these last decades, with much more progress now, and to be able to determine the propriety of this clot inside the artery is obviously a way to offer new progress and new cure for patients. This is really the real life. And moreover, this sensor, this smart sensor, will be integrated in fantastic projects sponsored by the French National Research Agency, we spoke about ANR a few minutes ago. This bio-art lung will be a full and autonomous artificial lung, and the role of the sensor will be to be integrated in the circuit to detect clot in the circuit, so that we prevent it to block the circuit and to treat it. And the first in man is planned in 2020, so it's in the very near future.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we do understand better how you guys work together and team up, still something puzzles me. Who is the owner of the pattern for the smart sensor? Is it École Polytechnique? Is it Sensome? Both of them?
It's all of the above. So there are currently 6 families of patents that we have. There's one family that's owned by École Polytechnique and that is licensed to Sensome. There's one family that's co-owned by École Polytechnique and Sensome, and the others are owned exclusively by Sensome.
Thanks for making this clearer and clearer to me, actually. Sacha, when do you think the first test on real patient, human beings, could be actually proceeded?
With this sensor Franz shows us, I think the first human test will be in 2019.
So it's like in an hour from now?
Yeah, nearly.
Okay, wow, wonderful. Still a question. Of course, we're talking about a very specific application for the smart sensor right now on strokes. And you mentioned also the art lung, bio-art lung actually project. But speaking of sensors, you know, we used to say there's an app for that. Can we say in the near future there's a sensor for that when it comes to health?
Yeah, so I think the vision for us really is to, as you saw, the sensor can be useful in many different domains. Stroke is really just the beginning for us. I mean, when we initially started, it was actually thought for cardiovascular disease, for stents. So I mean, we want to really develop all these different applications that also Sacha mentioned in the future, be there in the head on guide wires, on implants, in the heart, also on stents, for example. But also another exciting field that will be coming fairly soon is in oncology, because the same sensor can differentiate between cancer and non-cancer cells. You can only imagine what that can open up. And we really want to establish a company and a technology that can help millions and millions of patients every year.
Yeah, if I may just finish up, and I really, as an academic, I find this exchange between an academic and the entrepreneurial side, the innovation side, very, very rewarding and very enriching to both sides. So anybody thinking along those lines, I strongly encourage you to do it. So.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the three of you. You are definitely released from duty on stage, because we are actually going to move on to our next segment. You've seen the amazing works of the researchers granted by the fund. But the other question is, how do we put them in the spotlight? How do we actually better storytell what they're doing every single day? Well, to do so, guess it or not, there's journalists and producers. You're welcome. Actually, we're going to welcome on stage three actually producers and journalists, amazing colleagues, by the way, and one other researcher, which is beginning to be his own showrunner when it comes to storytelling science, and of course, is definitely part of the mission of the AXA Research Fund. Please join me in welcoming Greg Foote, science investigator for YouTube and for the BBC, Clea Chakraverty for The Conversation, Nadine Heggie for the National Geographic, and David Rios, okay, I'm going to do this really right, AXA-ICMAT Chair in Adversarial Risk Analysis and member of the Spanish Royal Academy of Sciences. So, Greg, science investigator. Let's start with you, actually, if you may. You've produced for the last 2 seasons the AXA Research Files. It's definitely available on YouTube, and it was, of course, part of the AXA Research Fund project when it comes to media. How do you actually find the perfect balance between the show part of it and the factual science part of it?
Good question. First, it's a pleasure to be back. It's wonderful every time I get to come back to AXA HQ. It's also really lovely looking around the room and seeing lots of researchers that I've done work with. It's so nice to see you again. So, yeah, I've worked in science communication for over 10 years, making lots of TV series for the BBC and lots for the People, and I've worked on YouTube for a very long time, making all sorts of content. I think some of the content I'm most proud of is the work that I've done with the AXA Research Fund scientists for lots of reasons that I hope we'll get on to. And for me, I'm a scientist by training. I'm a scientist. I studied natural sciences at Cambridge University in the UK. So for me, the science is always number one. That's always the first thing. But then it's about the story that you tell of that science. So you can choose lots of different stories around your science, and but the science has got to be correct. So balancing the show and the science comes first. In terms of the show, yes, it can be fun, it can be entertaining, it can be humorous, it can be engaging, it can be packed full of jeopardy. But what's most important is it needs to be engaging. And being engaging is all about capturing the attention. It's all about making sure that the story that you're telling is about the people that are watching or listening or sat there in the audience. And it's exactly what Thomas was saying. You know, it's relevance. You've got to pick the part of the research that's the most relevant and use that as your hook to then start telling your story. So the show is very important, but for me and for the whole team that worked on the AXA Research Files, the science is number one.
So what did you discover so far working day to day with scientists and amazing scientists? Are scientists a new superhero?
Are scientists the new superhero? Short answer, yes. So I get to work with so many scientists all around the world. I do a lot of training with scientists from the Royal Society of Great Britain, for the Wellcome Trust, the Francis Crick Institute. I get to spend a lot of time with scientists, and when I say to scientists, what do you do that's changing the world, that's lighting us up? What's the story that you want to tell? Lots of them go, I just work on these two cells that pull apart, and it's the spindle in between. I'm like, no, I can guarantee, and trust me, I've put this to the test, every single scientist is working on something amazing, but quite often they're focusing on one very narrow part very deeply, and they sometimes stop. They don't step back and see the context and see the implications, see the applications, see the wonder, see the relevance to the audience. So I think the process is, even if you're working on flies day in, day out for years, or you're taking soil samples or water samples in the same place over and over again, you need to just step back and realize, especially the AXA Research Fund scientists, because as we've already heard, everybody has been selected from such a large application pool because their work is the best in the world, and it already has that relevance. It's almost a gift of a story. But yeah, every scientist that I've had the pleasure to work with, we've always found the way to present their story and to show to them, as well as to the audience, that their work is incredible.
And that's definitely the way you can actually reveal their talents, which is also part of one of your many talents for yourself, which is media training, and helping them actually trying to better come across what they're doing to engage wider audiences.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working on some of the pop science days here and doing the other training that I've mentioned. And it's really about working with a scientist to say, okay, first, let's work out the hook of your research. What is the relevance? What is the thing that's going to spark the interest, the wonder, the curiosity in the audience member, that's going to pull them in? So hook them, grab the attention, and then how are you going to maintain that? And the best way to do that is story. And everybody has their own story of their research, but there's the story of the wider application. And that's a lot about what the AXA Research Fund is all about. And it's pulling out that story and working with them to let them see how engaging and interesting their work is.
Thank you very much. We'll turn back to Clea right now, because actually, we talked about the way we can actually better storytell science through the BBC magazine type of format or YouTube. There's other formats in the internet, like, of course, the conversation. And science teaches law, of course, but how can we actually bring science to a more news type of angle? How do we break the news with science?
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, everyone. Yes, it's actually, Greg said it all already.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Greg. No, really, there are various ways to engage scientists and scholars into the public debate. One of the things we do with the conversation is, of course, as journalists, we scrutinize the news. We are looking always for what's happening in current affairs, of course, but also academic publications. And one thing that scholars tend to forget to do is to actually identify specific aspects of their research that are very relevant for the lay readers. They don't usually really know or take the time to identify that or to specify it. And as Greg said earlier, we try to find the relevance with the public debate. And what we want to do is that we want to make the science the public debate itself. We want them to be the news. I'll take just one example from the AXA Research grantees that we worked with. One of them worked on frauds on credit cards. And his research was presented to me as something quite complicated. I don't have a background like you, Greg, as a hard science. I would say I'm more of a social scientist. And I couldn't understand what he's talking about. Algorithm, not my thing at all. So I'm like the first reader. I'm your first reader. If I don't understand you, no one else will. So I'm asking the scientists, okay, you're working on credit cards. This is the beginning of the summer. Everybody is going to have a problem at like traveling, being like, being actually abused on credit cards, not knowing what to do, etc. Can you explain to us how we can avoid that? Can you explain to us how this works, how credit cards work? And he did that, exactly that, and the piece got about, what I think, 150,000 reads, which is huge for something so complicated. So that's one thing that we do. The other thing is also asking them to present their work, telling them, look, if you're at a family dinner, that's often something I tell to scientists, and you're explaining your job, most of the time you're going to say, I'm going to skip that part because you won't understand it. So I want you to make me understand that. I want you to be able to tell your science and your work to other people in your family who have no background at all in sciences. And the last thing I think is really important we try to do, as I said earlier, we want to try to make the science become the news. I mean, it often happens that at the conversation, when we publish a scholar and his work, it becomes the news. I mean, it doesn't have to be, it actually breaks the news cycle and it becomes the news. Because it doesn't have to be a commentary, it's not an opinion that we're asking you. I'd like just to come back to something that's been said earlier. Our Minister of Education just said earlier that science is not giving you answers, but science can give you leads. And we're not asking a scientist to judge, that's not the role of a scientist. But he can give you lead and he can give you keys to understand the world or other things or engage in the public debate. So that's what the conversation is about, and that's what we tried them to do in the work so far.
And that's actually what we've been doing over the past 2 years with 22 beneficiaries from the fund. Nadine, let's turn the conversation, if I may, to the National Geographic, because of course when we think about National Geographic as a brand, it's all about science and telling great stories. So is it all about the story first, to engage with audiences?
So, yeah, storytelling is definitely at the heart of who we are at National Geographic. And if I may, I'd love to just tell you a little bit more about who we are. We are ourselves a grant-giving scientific organisation, and we've been giving grants to scientists and researchers for over 130 years. And way back then, they would return from the field and they would report and document their findings through a very dry science primer, which was then called the National Geographic magazine. And at the turn of the last century, our editor, who was at the time Alexander Graham Bell, a scientist himself, he took the bold decision to add photographs and illustrations to the magazine. And this was met with some consternation. A couple of our board members resigned. They thought this was a terrible idea. They thought it would never take on. And they thought it was about dumbing down the science. But obviously his ideas prevailed, and the brand of National Geographic has really become known for visual storytelling as well as deep science. So the magazine and our media platforms have gone from strength to strength, and now when you look at us on social media, we're reaching over 450 million people with a science message, but that's really visually compelling. One of our grantees is Dr. Jane Goodall, and she's quoted as saying that the greatest challenge to the future is apathy. And so what we believe at National Geographic is that by taking science and blending it with really, really visually compelling storytelling, you can truly get people to care. And when they care, they will make the right decisions about making a positive impact in the world.
And actually what you did when producing with the AXA Research Fund 3 different campaigns. There's one on tackling climate change, the other one on the future of food, and another one on smart and resilient cities. So what's your experience working day to day with the grantees of the AXA Research Fund?
Well, we had a fantastic experience working with the AXA research team and the grantees. And as you mentioned, we've produced 3 campaigns focusing on climate change, the future of food, and resilient cities. It started with the science. So we put the AXA research grantees at the heart of the story. And we chose a number of devices to bring the science to the surface. So the first year, where we were focusing on climate change, we partnered the grantees with a National Geographic grantee who was specializing in climate change. So it really blended our 2 brands in a really appropriate way. The second year, and Dr. Esther Arts was in the opening video, we were able to showcase the scientists in their labs and out in the field. So we were able to show them physically conducting the science through the videos. And in the third year, we partnered multiple AXA Research Grantees together to help tell and elevate that scientific story. So we took that and then we blended that science with National Geographic's visually compelling storytelling techniques. To create a really, and we talked a lot today about relevance, but to take a story and make it relevant to the audiences that we were trying to reach out to. And then we took it one step further. What a piece of content, and Greg, I'm sure you know this, a piece of content that works in long form BBC does not necessarily work on YouTube. Absolutely. So we modified and adapted the versions of the stories based on the platforms and the audiences they were reaching out to. So it was all about being rooted in science, taking a great story, and then reaching that story to a widest possible reach as we possibly can.
Someone which also know actually how to reach wide audiences and wild, by the way, audiences on the internet is definitely you, David Rios. If I tell you it's a risky life, what would you answer?
Well, first, I was fortunate enough to start engaging with AXA. Actually, I was in one of these countries which was very much hit by the crisis, and thanks to AXA, I could devote time to think on long-term projects. As a byproduct of my chair, I was actually worried because my daughters were learning in a wrong way concepts like probability, risk, insurance, etc. And I had experimented this problem also with my students at the university, and I thought, talking with the AXA communication team, that it might be a good idea to try to explain in the right way such concepts. And that was basically, we thought of engaging ways to convince such ideas in the hope of avoiding people being fooled by such concepts.
So actually, you really have to watch the show. It's a risky life. It sounds super crazy, but it is. And still, it's perfect, pure science explained to engage, again, with wider audiences, to storytell what your research are all about and what science is all about. If you want to know more, of course, you can dive into this thing called the internet and something called YouTube, by the way, and definitely watch the shows. That would be the most vivid way or vibrant way, actually, to tell more about how science can be so catchy when it comes to watching it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.